Hoi hoi, welcome! This is the Little Feat Radio Show. I'm your host, Red Miller, and today I'll be talking with Bill Payne about the history of Little Feat. So, Bill, welcome to the Little Feat Radio Show, live and in person. Holy cow.
This is like new uncharted territory for me. I love it.
So, for those of you, I know most of you that are watching today are Little Feat fans. You know that Bill is the keyboardist, vocalist, and co-founder of Little Feat. He's also one of the most respected musicians in the business. In addition to his work with Little Feat, Bill has played on hundreds of recordings, performed with acts including Bob Seger, Linda Ronstadt, James Taylor, Doobie Brothers, Jimmy Buffett, and many more.
Wow.
Bill was there for Little Feat's beginning, and he's here with us now. Bill, thank you for joining us on the Little Feat Radio Show.
Red, a pleasure. Yeah, everybody out there, I'm either really good or I can't hold a job. I think it's a little bit of both.
Oh my goodness. Well, today, I know when we last spoke on the Little Feat Radio Show, which was via Zoom, today we're in person, we talked about Little Feat in 3 acts.
Right.
So today I'd like to actually talk about the 3 acts, but because so much has been written about that first act with Lowell, and especially considering Ben Fong Torres' 2013 book, Willin', The Story of Little Feat, so much has happened since that book was written in 2013.
Yes.
I'd like to start with Act 3 today.
Act 3 is fine.
And what we'll do is we'll focus on the band members and studio recordings. I know we've just got a little amount of time here, so of course I can't wait to read your memoir. It's one of my favorite things to do is to read books about musicians and their experiences from their perspective. So thank you so much. Glad to hear that it's in process. So what we're going to do is start with Act 3, and I'm going to talk, when we get to albums, I'm mostly going to focus on studio albums and ask you to pick one song to talk about from each of those.
Sure.
Okay. So let's go. Act 3, Little Feat Today. And I noticed the albums tour just went on sale. Well, I already had tickets for the Warners, and the rest of them, I don't know if there's going to be more, but I've got some for the Ryman coming up as well. So hopefully I'll see you in Nashville at the end of September.
Good. Yeah, Ryman Town Hall's another one. There's a bunch of cool days. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I see a lot of posts on social media about who are the Little Feat members. So I've got Bill.
Who and why?
You started in '69. Kenny Sam started in '72.
Yes.
I know Fred was around from the beginning, but he became a full member in '87. Is that correct?
88.
Something like that. And Scott Sherrard started playing with you in 2019. I think Tony came on, Tony Leone. Scott was on guitar and vocals.
Right.
And Tony Leone on drums 2020, something like that.
Yeah.
So basically Act 3 began in 2019. Paul became ill while you're on your 50th anniversary tour, and you had Larry Campbell and Teresa Williams fill in for a bit, and then Scott Sherrard, and unfortunately we lost Paul on Scott's first night with the band.
Correct, yeah.
But he continued on to play with you for the Jamaica shows in early 2020.
Yes.
And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah, it was a trifecta.
But we want to thank you for keeping the band going through the pandemic. I know you have that one video on for Fool Yourself, which wasn't really the band, but it was you and Fred and Scott.
Yes.
And then you went and did Long Distance Love with Tony on drums, which I know I talked to Tony, and he said that was bizarre because he never played with the band, and there you're doing the videos together. So that was, the distance recording. Then you did When All Boats Rise.
Yes.
And finally, the most recent is Fat Man in the Bathtub. And then you went out on tour in November 2021, which was still shortly after the vaccines came out, so we had all the pandemic restrictions too.
Yep.
And that lasted, the By Request tour was November to February. Then you had the Waiting for Columbus tour, which included the Ryman shows, which PBS recorded.
Yes.
Which was great. And now you're doing your Boogie Your Spring Away tour. So,
what will they think of next?
So I guess the question that we're all going to be asking, maybe I know when Scott talked about it, he said you were all waiting for OPM for the next Little Feat record.
There's a couple things brewing on that level. One is a record I've wanted to do for a long time, and it's going to be probably more like an EP rather than an album, but it's blues, and we're going to feature Sam Clayton.
Nice.
I think that's going to be just dandy to do that. We do have another Little Feat record that we're putting together. We're looking for a producer, somebody I'm going to co-produce with and work with, and bring in as a partner. And we've got some great managers at Vector in Nashville helping us do all this. Brian Penix and Ken Levitan. Ken's the overseer of a lot of things, and he's been managing Emmylou Harris for a very, very long time. Excellent. John Hyatt and Rodney Corral just came aboard, so it's a good, stable collection of people and friends of ours, as it turns out.
Well, I think everybody that's watched Act 3 come together has been really impressed with the team you've pulled together to make this all work. So
it's really about that, as you well know, right? Because we in Act 2, we had to do a very similar thing. So this ground has been covered before. It's not any different than any kind of political campaign of whatever side of the quotient you're on. It's about putting the right people in the right place and letting them do what they do.
Well, let's talk, if you mentioned Act 2, that's about time for us to get into Act 2. And just to set the stage, of course, Lowell passed in '79
Yes.
while he was promoting his solo album. And of course, Fred Tackett was the guitar player with Lowell at that time. And you all went your separate ways after that, with solo, studio, and touring projects. And I remember seeing you and Fred on tour with Bob Seger in, I think it was '86. And there was some discussion at that time about maybe bringing the Little Feat back together. I think Sean Murphy was on that tour too.
She was, yes, indeed.
And then in '87 it actually happened. I thought it was '88, but Kenny corrected me. He said, no, we got first back together in '87.
We, let's see, '86, so '87. We did. The project came out in '88.
Yeah.
So we were writing and getting everything
And
together.
that lineup had you, of course, on keys. Richie Hayward was on drums and vocals, the original Little Feat drummer.
Yes.
Paul Barrere, who I mentioned, came on board in '72, was on guitar. Now, it's actually Kenny and Sam came on board, but Paul also did in '72.
Paul was just a little bit before them.
Yeah. And then Fred Tackett came on board with this formation of Little Feat, as did Craig Fuller for vocals and guitar, mostly vocals from what I remember.
Yeah.
And he'd come from Pure Prairie League.
Absolutely.
So that's the lineup. I would like to talk again, but now we've got some studio recordings.
Yes.
And of course the big one from that, maybe one of your more successful in that whole Act 2 was Let It Roll, the first one that came out.
Yes.
It was the single Hate to Lose Your Lovin' became #1 on Billboard's mainstream rock chart. And that album was actually nominated for a Grammy as well.
It was, and we lost, I guess, if you want to put it in those terms, which I just did, to Bono and U2. So if you're going to lose to somebody, lose to the best.
Yes. So if you could think of one song from that album that comes to mind, what would it be?
Well, I think you mentioned it. Hate to Lose is a good one. Paul and Craig Fuller wrote that too. And so that dynamic between those two guys was really what I was most interested in, was how, as when any group of people get together, how do they interact with one another? And so that song was, it sounded like Little Feat. It had all the energy. It had ample room for me to play what I play as a rock and roll, a bastardization of many styles. It's not New Orleans, it's not rock and roll.
It's the Bill Payne style.
It's my style, exactly. And it fit right into Hate to Lose Your Lovin'. And so that was a terrific song to start. And also for anybody out there that plays drums or percussion, most of our music sounds very easy until you try and play it. And especially so when it comes to what Richie was doing. I mean, he's throwing more people off than merry-go-rounds in the third world. The beat that he's got on there, again, it is not rock and roll, it's not New Orleans, it's Richie Hayward. Rather a unique personage.
I remember another one that comes to mind. I actually went to Jazz Fest when you all were getting back together in '88, and I was there at the Riverboat President.
Ooh.
And I remember when Let It Roll came out, it just blew the song. It just blew me away. And the other thing that blew me away about that performance was all the fans singing along. They knew all the words.
They did. I actually went out, I went out into the audience. I think it was sound check. We had a bunch of people in there. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Buffett was there. Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes. I heard later for the gig, Stevie. Anyway, we had a lot of people there. I think Bonnie might have been there. It was just a wonderful evening. But I went out and asked those fans. I said, I see you singing these lyrics with us. How did that happen? They said their aunts, their uncles, their moms, their dads, their friends. It was a community affair, and that's how they did it. And I thought, this bodes really well for this band in terms of the longevity of it. It also fits in, Red, with how in 2023 we can still call a group legitimately Little Feat.
Indeed.
So,
well, let's continue on with Act Two. The next album that came out was Representing the Mambo in 1990.
Yeah.
Give me a song from Representing the Mambo that really comes to mind for you.
Well, there's a couple. Mambo itself was a good one, in that I brought in Neon Park as a lyricist.
Oh wow! Okay.
On that. He had something about high heels, stilettos, in a poem that he'd given us. I thought, that's cool. I mean, what else you got? So we centered the story obviously in Rio. I'd been down there with James Taylor for the first Rock in Rio festival. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the year, probably 94 maybe. Would have been in the 80s. At any rate, whenever it was, Fred Tackett had been to Rio de Janeiro with Carol Lindley, James Coburn, Jimmy Webb. Mm-hmm. And the House of Samba was a place where people were selling weed and stuff. So he threw that in there. Neon's contribution was he would gather in Mexico's San Allende, I think, northern part of Mexico, and he went to a party and they go, "Oh, you look like this guy Frank," and "Oh, really? Oh, yeah, he died of excessive bets in Barcelona." So that was that.
Okay, well, let's take it up. One more album from this. I almost call this Act 2, Scene 1 with Craig Fuller. Yeah. And that was Shake Me Up when you moved off Warner Brothers to Morgan Creek. And I know some people have called this the Stealth album. But you did have the Paul Barrere duet with Sean Murphy on Spider's Blues. Now, obviously I've given you one, but is there some other song that, or maybe even that song that you think of from Shake Me Up? Shake Me
Up, oh my gosh. Well, we were just listening to Spider's Blues the other night on the bus. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of it's close to Dixie Chicken, to be honest with you. I mean, it's got that kind of groove, that sound. But yeah, the marriage of voices between those two was stellar. I think Sean's energy, to my mind, she fit in just beautifully with us. And there was a lot of controversy about bringing a female into the boys' club. But I thought she could hold her own, and we finally made a decision to get back to what we were doing before. Right. Well, that's of course puts us into Act 2, Scene 2, where I guess on the album liner notes for "Ain't Had Enough Fun," it says Craig Fuller decided the road was not for him, and Sean it came on board, I believe, in '93. Okay. Yeah. And then you had Ain't Had Enough Fun, I just mentioned that came out in '95 on Zoo, which I think became Volcano. Oh yeah. How about a song from that stands out for you? Name a couple, because I can't remember. Well, there's Ain't Had Enough Fun. That was a fun one for me. I got a chance to kind of play some semi-gospel piano in that. Yeah. And yeah, it's. I like that kind of thing, and it moves really quickly. There's a lot of chords in it. Paul and Fred, when they started doing it as a duo without the piano, son's piano, they kind of they dumbed it down a little bit. I'll just be blunt about it, but it still worked. But the fun was about our music are the turnarounds, are the little twists and turns. For me, yeah, you can take things out and it still works, but that's why we call ourselves Little Feat, I suppose.
Well, let's continue on. I mean, we've only got a little bit of time. I could talk about, like the bass kicks and Dixie Chicken, which almost nobody gets like Kenny does, but I'll digress. Let's continue on to Under the Radar, 1998. And I know we had Locomotives on that one, and wasn't Calling the Children Home on there, and a few others.
Was Borderline Blues on that one?
I think that was on Ain't Had Enough Fun.
Oh, it was, okay. Well, let's see. So Under the Radar, we're not playing that one yet, but we're going to be learning it again. Mm-hmm. We have two, we're kind of getting into this format now, but it relates to our past, which is Under the Radar, we have two different versions of it. One is the straight ahead, this real dreamy quality tune, and it's more autobiographical for me. Stand on the edge of a highway, going back to see a friend. I was going back to see my friend Dee Huffman, who in my memoir, which is entitled Carnival Ghosts.
Carnival Ghosts.
Carnival
Okay.
Ghosts, yeah. Dee plays a prominent role in that dear friend, surfing buddies, that kind of thing. He saw the inception of Little Feat. He's passed away a few years ago, but he was always there at these what I call for myself, and we'll write about it, are the wilderness, out in the wilderness, where I'm not in Little Feat necessarily. I'm trying to figure out what my next moves are going to be. And he was a real stalwart as a friend and a sounding board for a lot of that. Yeah, so the two versions are, like I said, the straight ahead version of Under the Radar, and then we have a reggae version, which cuts out a verse or part of a verse, I think, has a different instrumental. And we're doing it for other songs now, where we want to elongate a shorter version of, let's say, Let It Roll. Let's put back in the jam that Paul and Fred used to do, but we'll take out where it used to go up to the G, where Paul would start taking off. Let's leave it in the key V. So Little Feat is always a work in progress, which, again, judging on what when Lowell in Act 1 put the thing together, it was always with the notion, Red, of having an elastic view of what the band was, is, and would be. Who's in it, who's doing what, that kind of thing.
Well, let's continue on with, you had a couple of them come out within a few years, albums here. The next one was Chinese Work Songs.
Oh, gosh.
Which, of course, had the song Chinese Work Songs. It also had Paul and Fred's Eula, which I know some people have called and said, why don't we'd love to hear Eula again?
Eula's a great tune. It really is, gosh. They were playing that on the bus the other night. Well, to those fans that want to hear all these things, and I've wanted to hear them too for years, to be honest with you. I mean, every incarnation of the band has its avenues of possibilities and places where things sort of tighten down a little bit. But we're really in a good spot. I was reading a book on John Coltrane where he was talking about the last iteration of one of his bands, which he thought was stellar. It doesn't denigrate what came before it. It's just a matter of where are you and where does that put you in doing what we do, what we're here to do, which is play our music, which is to be inspired to write new music, whether there's a place to put it or not. I think there is a place to put it. It's in front of us, first and foremost, to identify ourselves as who we are as artists, and that is the handshake we have with our fans.
Very good. Well, if fans haven't heard a lot from Kicking It at the Barn, which came out in 2003 either, I know that I wrote down here just to remind me, Night on the Town was one that I thought was a real stellar one. It's another one of Fred's compositions.
Fred is just, what a gem he is. he comes up with these things that only Fred could do, right? I won't talk about a song so much on that record as I will an incident that took place when we were recording it. We were down at the bottom of this hill.
And this is the barn. Set it up. What was the
barn? Was it was a building that Fred either owned or knew about, and he said we could record there. But it was the bottom of a very steep dirt hill.
Was this in Topanga?
Yeah.
Okay.
And apparently somebody was complaining about the noise, and one of the local officers showed up to discuss it with us. He gets down there. Oh, it's Little Feat. The Little Feat? Oh, we go, yeah. And he goes, oh, forget it. Don't, just do what you're going to do. And he tries to get up the hill and he can't. He keeps. Finally just punched it and got the hell out of it.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
That's a funny story.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, you had an album with many special guests that Jimmy Buffett had a hand in, joined the band 2008. And that was the last with Sean and also the last with Richie.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Wow. That album, the song I would cherry pick would be, it's just any of them because there's so many stories on that record. But I'll take the one, Fat Man in the Bathtub with Dave Matthews.
Yeah.
Most people that came in to do that record wanted to do Willin', to be honest. I think he was one of them. I said, no, Brooks and Dunn are doing that one, so can you do what? And I think I gave him the option. So he chose Fat Man in the Bathtub. What took place was he put on about 16 tracks on that record of vocals and chirps and South African, clicks and all kinds of things. And he was scheduled and did, in fact, appear on the David Letterman show the day after, and he could barely talk because he'd lost his voice working for us. So, thank you, Dave.
That takes during that time you had a number of live recordings. I just want to mention one of my favorites was Live from Neon Park, and of course you had the High Wire Act live in St. Louis, which was also a DVD.
Yeah,
wonderful recordings. But it takes us to Scene 3, which started around 2009 when I mentioned that Sean had left and Richie Hayward left us completely. But you brought Gabe Ford on board.
right.
And during that time you also recorded in 2012 Rooster Rag.
Yes.
Which I know everybody says Rooster Rag is really wonderful, especially you have the Robert Hunter lyrics. And another one that he wrote that I had here is one that I really like is Rag Top Down.
I do too. The band, people in the band can be contrary to a lot of things. That's why it's a band, right? Mm-hmm. You serve chicken, somebody wants duck or a turkey or whatever. I mean, not everybody thought as much about the Robert Hunter songs as I did, or maybe you did. I would like to very much. I wrote 20 songs with Robert.
Okay.
First and foremost, and I think they're terrific tunes. And but I also will interject at this point that when I played "Oh Atlanta" for the band, there wasn't one single person that saluted and go, "Oh, that is cool."
My goodness.
No, nor did they do the. Nor did it happen with "Let It Roll." Richie, I said, "Are you okay with this?" He goes, "I don't know. I don't like it." I go, "Really?" And I agonized over it for 2 weeks, and then brought it back into a 5-week rehearsal, 5-week cycle rehearsal. I brought it back in. I said, "Can you hear what I'm playing?" He goes, "No." And I go, "Okay, we're going to make sure you can hear me, and we're going to play the song." And in both cases, I said, we're playing the song whether you guys like it or not. That's just being in a band. You really have to have commitment to who you are as an individual. And
do you think some of it has to do with the intricacies of what's built into it? I know I've charted out "Oh Atlanta," and I can play roughly. I can't play like Bill Payne, but the 1 to the 5 stuff, no problem. Everybody gets that.
Of course.
But the rest of the stuff, you got some really subtle changes in there.
I think it's just focus and what people can or can't hear at the time. And I've come to embrace the notion that being a leader of anything, you're not a leader as Franklin Roosevelt, I'm bastardizing what he said, but if you look around and people are 150 yards in back of you, you're not the leader any longer.
Right.
However, when you are in that slot, you're there to take the incoming from wherever they happen. But it leads to having conviction about what you're doing, but also being, open to ideas and suggestions. It's a precarious place to be, and it's not just being in a band, it's in any position, whether at your school or wherever. It's not an easy place to be, but this is how things get done. You can't have amoebas, which my mindset becomes at times, run the show. You have to have direction.
Well, speaking of leadership, that takes us back to, as I mentioned, doing Act 3, Act 2,
Yes.
Act 1. Because in 1969, you and Lowell founded Little Feat as a quartet, and it was just you, Lowell George on slide guitar and vocals, Richie Hayward, of course, the original drummer, coming in from Fraternity of Man, right?
Yep. Yes.
And then Roy Estrada, who was with Lowell and the Mothers of Invention, who left in '73 to join Captain Beefheart's band.
Right.
I know Ben Fontoris talks a little bit about the various ways people interpret how Roy left, but I guess he finally concluded, Roy said it was for health reasons because he had asthma and LA wasn't good for him.
Oh, well.
So let's talk about studio recordings. And the first one came out in '71, the self-titled Little Feat. And of course, you didn't have Neon Park on board for the cover then. It was y'all, and it was was it the side of a building in Venice, something like that?
It was the LA Art Squad.
Okay.
Those are the guys that painted it.
And that was the first recording that you did of Willin'. Is there another? And there's so much on there that I just love, but for you, one song in particular from that album.
Well, I think your instincts are good. Will and I will talk about for a number of reasons, but again, it kind of fits into what I was just talking about, which when you have a band, people have opinions, etc. That song was not recorded with us. It was recorded before Little Feat formed. So it might have been with Richie, could have been with Martin Kibbe playing bass. Maybe they overdubbed Roy. I didn't play on that track. And when I heard it, because I brought down country music with me to Los Angeles in 1969, specifically Conway Twitty, George Jones, that kind of thing. When I heard that tune, it sounded like a caricature of a truck driver. Lowell's voice sounded like he was making a characterization of it. As did the music. Pair that with what is on Sailing Shoes.
Yes.
And that's when that song took off. That's when that assumed the mantle of an iconic, not just an iconic Little Feat song, an iconic song, period.
Okay, let's talk about Sailing Shoes.
Yeah.
Since we just jumped in. Of course, Willin' is probably the #1 song that people think of when they think of Little Feat. Dixie Chicken, probably #2.
Yeah.
But on Sailing Shoes, one track.
I'm going to choose Easy to Slip. A lot of people are Bob Weir's done it. I think the Wood Brothers, they've jumped into the pool on that one. This album for Lowell, and that song in particular, was a marker for Lowell to assume full leadership, which I think he did quite brilliantly. And I was still trying to find my way as a singer, etc. But Lowell really took charge, and it was his attempt to write a single, which it was not, but it didn't denigrate the fact that it was still a wonderful tune. Mm-hmm. And when what I call studio ears, when you really listen to that song and check out what he's playing on guitar, that complexity that he was using was the beginning of the end as him as a solo guitar player for us. He was doing too much. He needed, and Richie and I felt he needed somebody to join the fray, which was going to be Paul Barrera.
Right.
But Lowell had that sensibility of songwriting style of how you his phrasing as a vocalist, as a player, that was all going full speed ahead, and I think that song is really indicative of all
Excellent. Well, and of course, a whole generation of Little Feat fans heard that song when it was used in the movie Almost Famous.
that. Yes.
So, and of course, that brings us to, you mentioned needing a second guitar player, to, I call this Act 1, C2, the classic lineup.
Yeah.
Paul came on board, and then, so it was Paul, then Kenny, and Kenny brought Sam along from
That's
playing
right,
in
yeah.
Delaney and Bonnie together.
Yes.
And you went right into, again, we mentioned Sailin' Shoes, one of the two on the albums tour coming up this fall, to Dixie Chicken.
Yes.
Certainly, when people point to the classic Little Feat sound, where you started to get some of that New Orleans into it as well. You mentioned the country coming in, but they point to Dixie Chicken. Do you want to pick one song from that album to talk about?
Boy, let's look at Fat Man in the Bathtub.
Okay, great one.
I think that that tune again exemplifies Lowell as his ability to pair lyrics with a cool groove, but he had the band to bring that groove to fruition. Nobody in the world plays like Richie Hayward, first and foremost. Not a lot of keyboard players play like I do either. So the thing that makes a song other than just a song is the feel. It's a signature lick, let's say. There was two signature licks, and well, let's just stick with the one in Fat Man in the Bathtub. That wasn't written. That's what I thought of and came up with when we had a Mellotron, or whatever it was called, that had drunk Mexican trumpets. Not exactly a politically correct way to call it, but that's what the sound was. And I grew up in Santa Maria and Ventura. We had a lot of lowriders and that kind of thing in town, both towns that I lived in. So that just fit. And what Richie was playing is just so kinetic, and I've seen people try and play that tune, or play Let It Roll, or play anything that Richie plays, other than straight ahead Charlie Watts beat that I had him do on Oh Atlanta, and they can't play it.
Just sitting down in the
They just, the feel just eludes them.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that. And then I think I was Spot Check Billy, so as far as I'll go.
Very good. Well, you mentioned playing Oh Atlanta, which takes us to Feats Don't Fail Me Now, 1974. What song you want to pick from that one?
Oh boy. There was one tune on that record, I think it was Rock and Roll Doctor, that Lowell said to me, here's a cassette, figure out what I did. And I write about that in my memoir. And I said that what he would do with a razor blade was he would literally cut the tape, which is like this, and then he'd splice it back together. And so I'm sitting out there in the room going, does he mean 7 beats, 6 beats, 5 beats? What is he trying to do here? And I just like go, all right, he means 6 beats. Let's do this. And I wrote it out, and I went and played it for him. He goes, sounds great. I go, okay, here we go.
I remember trying to chart that one out in 79.
It's impossible.
Going, there's nothing that repeats. It all sounds like it repeats, but it's different. There's no verse that's the same.
Yeah, well, I'm part of the culprit, and Lowell's the culprit, obviously, but that's the way we operated. And the other thing we did, remember Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, where the astronauts, they don't want to know what they're doing or why. It wasn't manly, or however they wanted to put it, to actually investigate why they did anything. It would take the edge off of things. We were the same way musically. We never questioned what we were doing. Richie go, well, why are you, this is a 5 beat. I go, no, Richie, it's when I come down on this, there's my 1. So it's not 5 beats, I'm back to 1, and here we go. Even if it were a 3 beat phrase, go da 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 boom, da 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 da, and then into a 4 beat. So we did things differently. Later, I made a pointed effort to really know what I was doing, and I did it with this outcome and emphasis to do it, I'm only broadening my vocabulary. I'm not taking away from anything that would curtail or get in the way of my creativity. I'm merely adding to my vocabulary by knowing what I'm doing.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about knowing what you're doing, and I think it scared some fans when you had an album out in 1975 called The Last Record Album.
Okay. Yeah, that's Lowell. He did that on purpose, and he was also taking an influence from the last
picture show. Right.
My dad had a theater in Texas that was called the Palace Theater, and it was straight out of that too. So.
Okay. And can you give us one song off of that album?
Day or Night.
Day or Night, very good.
Oh my gosh, what a journey that was. That thing just goes through so many permutations. It is a storyline with being in the city, obviously, and the street and stream take you to these different places. It's about being not hooked to anything in particular. You're on your own. It was autobiographical from my standpoint, but the playing that went into it was just a notch
up. Oh my
up.
goodness, and it still works.
It works like a charm.
Indeed.
And, yeah.
Well, speaking of things that still work, 1977, Time Loves a Hero.
Yeah. Ooh. I use Time Loves a Hero. I'll take off on that subject for a matter. I used that as an opportunity to address those that are with us. So as I was introducing the band on stage, the new incarnation of the group. And I used at the very end, I used it to name the people that were not with us, but always in our hearts. Richie, Lowell, Richie, and Paul in that order. And little did I know when I was writing it, I had some help with it, but it was mainly a trip I'd made with Franny down to the Caribbean back in the day. We stopped in Puerto Rico gambling casino, and then I just started building a story out of that. But it's about where we place things in our lives. You know, does Frank Zappa sound as cool as he did? Susie Cream Cheese, is it done when we're smoking Steves and Stims? Or is it a little more sophomoric? It's up for debate. You know, I mean, it depends on what you're listening to and why. But moreover, it was directed at people like Nixon, Trump, anything in the future that we want to. That was the attempt for me to put things in a historical perspective, which I'm trying to do in my book as well.
Excellent. And of course, that was the last Little Feat album that came out while Lowell was alive.
Yeah.
And Down on the Farm came out after he passed, and bittersweet album.
Very much so.
You want to talk about a song on there that you think of?
Oh gosh. Well, I love Down on the Farm. I'm also trying to think of that was a really tough record with the loss of Lowell.
Now you recorded some of that. Did Lowell have the Wally Hyder truck up at his house at the top of Topanga there?
He might have had that for some of it because of the frogs, shut up, that whole thing. Richie also got injured on that record. He was in the hospital. Second bike injury for Richie.
Wow.
And he was going out to see Lowell. But yeah, the song Down the Farm was a song that Paul wrote with his dad,
okay,
who was a character actor. Both his parents were in the movie business. His mother was in Psycho with that Hitchcock directed.
So it's sort of like Old Folks Boogie that he wrote with his dad as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a vaudeville routine.
Excellent.
So.
Okay. Well, we're just about wrapping up Act 1, which of course you had a couple of really notable live releases, which comes to mind, Waiting for Columbus, which you just finished that tour last year.
Yes.
For the 45th anniversary. And you just also in 2021 released Electric Lycanthrope, which was recorded at Ultrasonic Studios in 1974.
Yeah.
A great live recording. So grateful that you were able to put that out for us. And there are also some compilation albums that came out from that act, including Hoy Hoy in 1981,
Yeah.
and Hotcakes and Outtakes. And if anybody really wants to read some good liner notes, the Bud Scopa liner notes and that are really tremendous on the Little Feat saga.
The best.
And both those albums included some previously unreleased tracks. So, and I understand you've got some unreleased stuff coming out in the re-releases of Dixie Chicken and Sailing Shoes. So.
Yeah, we're very pleased that Warner Brothers is back on board with us.
Okay.
There's going to be a series of releases that take place. Waiting for Columbus was the first. Now we've got this, as I just said, Sailing Shoes and Dixie Chicken. There's going to be some excellent liner notes in both of those too. Dennis McNally, I think, wrote the liner notes for Dixie Chicken, and I'm having a senior moment as to who wrote the liner notes for Sailing Shoes, but it's from a guy that's very well known.
So we'll leave that as a surprise for the.
There you go. A surprise to me too.
I just want to close by talking about, obviously I've just rediscovered vinyl and getting into it, just thinking,
Yeah.
wow, it sounds really good if you don't scratch it all up and play it to death. And a good cartridge in your works as well. But we are in the age of streaming. And I know I looked into one thing about Spotify, is you look and see how many monthly listeners. Do you ever look at something like that just to see what kind of numbers you're pulling in?
Well, I when they give us the breakdown, they tell you how many people are listening to things.
I know.
And they don't pay you anything. I mean, I think Spotify is a lot better than some, but it is. Look, they got to go a long way to make this a lot better for artists. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, understood. But 1.2 million monthly Spotify listeners is pretty darn good.
Yeah, and when you're getting 25 cents for it, it's or $40.
But it's also interesting to see, the songs that are listed. Of course, I mentioned Willin' #1, Dixie Chicken 2, Spanish Moon #3, Long Distance Love, Roll 'Em Easy, 2 Trains, and Skin It Back. I think those are the top 7 that I picked out, just in terms of what are people listening to on Spotify.
Yeah, and I think it's valuable on that level for us to know what people are listening to. And I'm not knocking streaming. I love it. I take advantage of it by my streaming service is Amazon Music. I wrote literally to Jeff Bezos when he was with Amazon, and I said, look, you don't have to answer me yourself if there's somebody from your company in the music department. I'd like to know what your next big thing is, because he was writing about it in Billboard. And he got back in touch with me through one of his surrogates, and they said, Jeff wanted to know if you had this Echo device. I said, no, because if you don't, he's going to send you one, and he did.
Nice.
And so my listening capabilities went from this to like outside that room to that mountain over there. Yeah. I get it. I love it, and I think people would pay to really make use of it. But yeah, it's enriched my life immeasurably.
It's one thing to stream it. It's another thing to hear it, like I mentioned, on vinyl, where you get the full range.
Yes.
But I just want viewers to know that it does matter if they're listening to the streaming services, and if they want to hear more Little Feat, listen to more Little Feat.
Yeah,
because,
please.
the people that are booking and promoting, they want to see what these numbers are, and are they going to draw? Which also ties into, if you want to hear more Little Feat, go see Little Feat live.
Yeah, which people in general have been doing. We are the thing I like the most about it, honestly. I mean, the crowds, sure, but the look of expectation on some people's faces, like, gee, I hope this is going to be good. And then they go, oh my gosh, it is! Whoa! And then they go nuts. And I've always enjoyed that part of it. It was a little rough quite a few years ago on that department, but it has really just come around now, and people are just embracing it wholeheartedly, and it's one big happy family at this joint.
Indeed.
at this juncture.
Well,
Excuse me.
Bill, as one of the members of this group of Little Feat fans, I want to thank you for your time today. You've been extremely gracious. I can't wait to read your book, and I'm looking forward to seeing the band tonight. Thank you.
Red, thank you for all you do and what you've done. It's you have with Gary Bennett and David Moss and a few others have really kept this ship afloat when in any other time period it probably would have sunk to the bottom of the toilet bowl.
The boat has risen.
All boats rise.
So thank you once again. Bill Payne on the Little Feat Radio
Red
Show.
Miller.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man.